joined us in the last 7 weeks. Last week we had our Easter service. 6 weeks before that we were in our small group campaign where we were talking about our purpose in life. Prior to that, we had spent 10 weeks talking about the life of Joseph. And so we're about 75-80% through his life, so we're going to finish that up. Hopefully by June is my goal. And let me bring you up to speed because it's been almost 2 months. And I know how forgetful all of us are, myself included. Joseph came from an incredibly dysfunctional family. We learned a lot of things. We learned the idea that your past does not determine your future. Rather, your choices do. And that's what you see in the life of Joseph. We looked at the issue of the way God spoke to people back then through dreams and visions and things like that. And that plays a big role in the life of Joseph. We talked about what his brothers did to him in putting him in a pit and selling him into slavery. And we talked about the idea that in the life of Joseph, Joseph never saw that as God doing something to him. Joseph saw it as God doing something for him. And it was really a defining moment in the life of Joseph, because at that moment, Joseph had to make a decision on how that was going to shape and mold his life. And so we find him really, instead of running from God, turning to God. And so when he finds himself in jail, he serves God. Eventually that ends up in Potiphar's household, and he gets a tremendous amount of blessings and financial things from that. He works his way all the way up, and then Potiphar's wife lies about him. He gets thrown and finds himself in prison again. Again, he continues to serve. He continues to be faithful to God no matter what his circumstances. Once he gets past that, he actually starts helping people. And the butler and the baker end up coming to prison there with Joseph. Joseph interprets their dreams. They forget him. Joseph continues to faithfully serve God. Eventually, he is called before Pharaoh to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And at that point, what happens is Joseph then, in interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, is promoted to the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. The idea that a Hebrew is now ruling over all of the Egyptians but one is an incredible story. What happens is, through all of it, Joseph ends up getting married, has 2 children. He ends up then basically being in charge of accumulating all of the grain and all of the food for Egypt for 7 years. Then a famine comes, and the people in Egypt are starving. So Joseph opens up the grain houses. He's now in charge of giving out all of the grain. Word starts going around the world that Egypt has grain. Back in the land of the Hebrews, Israel, Joseph's family sits. His daddy, Jacob, or Israel, and his 11 brothers, sitting there in the land, decide to go to Egypt to get food. So they take a whole bunch of silver. They go to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph notices his family. So Joseph calls them in and questions them and accuses them of being spies. And they say, no, we're not. Here's our story. They tell him the story. They tell him the whole background about the fact that they're actually the sons of one man, that one of his kids is no longer, not realizing they're talking to Joseph. Joseph looks like an Egyptian. He's been now in Egypt for at least 20 years. Everything about him looks Egyptian. He's speaking the language of the Egyptians. He is communicating that way. Finally, the brothers go back. Joseph decides to bless them by putting the silver that they were going to use for grain in their sacks. When they discover that, they realize, oops, he's going to think we stole it. Joseph leaves Simeon there, or Joseph keeps Simeon there, and basically says, if you're going to come back a second time, you bring your little brother. That way I'll know you're not lying to me. That's where we're going to pick up the story this morning. This morning we're going to look at basically the reunion that he has with his brothers. And then we're going to look next week at the idea of Joseph gives them one final test to find out if their hearts have really changed. So this morning we pick up the story in Genesis chapter 43. I don't have time to read the whole chapter, so I'm going to read a section, give you a summary, the next little section, and then go to it. So here's what it says. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again until your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we'll go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down.' Because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Talking about Benjamin. This would have been Joseph's little brother. Israel, or the dad, asked, "Why do you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had a brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our families. Your father living," he asked, "you have another brother?" We simply answered his question. How were we to know that he would say, "Bring your brother down here"? So what happens is then there's a big argument. Reuben basically says, "Look, Dad, here's the deal. I'll guarantee Benjamin's safety, Jacob or Israel." The dad says, "No, we're not going to do that." Finally, Judah says, "Look, if I don't come back with him, you can take my two sons." And so finally, Jacob agrees to send Benjamin with his brothers, all 10 of them, down to Egypt. Because remember, Simeon's already there and Joseph's in charge. So the story picks up. So the men took gifts and double the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. Now, Jacob, by the way, had learned this when he had to meet Esau. He sent a whole bunch of gifts ahead of time. So this is kind of he's learned this work. So he goes, "Okay, take them a whole bunch of stuff and double the money." And they turned down to Egypt, presented themselves to Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, now remember, this is the first time he had seen his little brother in over 20 years. He said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." So what happens is they then come down to Joseph's house, and immediately when they meet the steward at the door, here's what they do. They look at the steward and they go, "Ooh, before we go in," because they didn't know what was going to happen. "Before we go in, here's what you need to know. The last time we were here, we brought silver. We gave you silver. You gave us grain. When we got just outside the city, we found the silver back in our bags. And we want you to know, we think it was a mistake. Somebody made a mistake, and so we brought the silver with us again." Notice what happens. The steward then says, "It's all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brings Simeon out to them, and the steward took the men into Joseph's house. He gave them water to wash their feet, provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. And they replied, "Your servant, our father," Joseph asked about him. He says, "Your servant, our father, is alive and well." They bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. And as he looked about, he saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son. And he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. And he went into his private room and he wept there. Going on. After he had washed his face, he came out controlling himself and said, "Serve the food." And they served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves. And this is going to be important as we go forward in the story, so remember this. Because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to the Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of the ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and they drank freely with him. So there's the story, all right? So let me walk you back through it, make sure we've got a good understanding of it, take a couple little rabbit trails, and then we're going to get to the application. Basically, there's a big conundrum at the beginning because they know that they need grain, and yet the kids are very adamant. Look, Dad, you don't understand. If we don't bring Benjamin with us, we're all dead people, because he's going to think we were spies. He's going to think we lied to him. The only way out of this is if we take Benjamin with him. And it's interesting because when you read the text and you read the story, what happens is Israel, Judah, it's the same person, Jacob is so upset that Benjamin has to leave. I mean, he's already lost Joseph. And so the idea now of losing Benjamin too, and he's already also, is in their mind, he's lost Simeon. So he's looking at it going, look, I'm not about ready to lose 3 children over this thing. And in fact, one of the statements that he makes in the story is he looks at him and he goes, finally when he agrees to let him go, he goes, whatever happens, happens, and I'll just get used to losing all my kids. That's kind of his attitude. And so finally they convince him to let Benjamin go with him. But it's a quick rabbit trail. There's a couple of interesting things with Jacob or Israel. And again, it's the same person, just 2 different names. But one of the things that happens in this story is he comes to his kids and he looks at them and he goes, how come you told him you had a brother? Do you understand the impact of that? When you look at the story in the life of Jacob, remember, Jacob deceived his mom and his dad over the birthright for Esau. So his whole idea, his whole name is Jacob, schemer, deceiver. So he does that. His kids grow up learning that, because what do they do with Joseph? They deceive their dad into thinking Joseph was dead and killed by an animal. And now, later in life, near the end of his life, Jacob, who's been a deceiver his entire life, has not changed at all. Even to the point that he looks at his own kids and he says, when you were in Egypt, why didn't you lie? Why did you tell the truth? Can you imagine having that discussion with the kids? Kids, I want to know, why did you tell the truth? You're not supposed to tell the truth, kids. Don't you know that? We lie. That's what we do in our family. That's the discussion Jacob is having with his kids. How come you told the truth? And he goes, you don't understand. This guy was going to kill us. So we told him the truth. We didn't know he was going to say, bring him down. But that's how far his mindset has gone, in that even at an old age, he had never, ever dealt with this issue in his life. And you still see him at an old age wanting to lie and deceive and actually encouraging his kids to do it. How crazy is that? But here's what you need to understand. If you don't break the generational cycles, that's exactly what will happen to your family as well. You'll continue to pass it down. Another idea here is it's amazing here that even Jacob could not see, like when they were given the silver back, the goodness of God. They never saw it as the goodness of God. They looked at it as God was doing something to them. Here's why. And you're going to see this all the way to the end in the story of Joseph. His brothers, because of their guilt, cannot see life clearly. Their guilt taints everything. Even when something good happens, they see it as bad. They are invited to Joseph's house for lunch, and they see it as a bad thing. Where the second they get to the door, they're like, oh, wait, before we go in, we got to tell you, because we think it's, and here's the craziness, we're going to talk about this at the end. The craziness is a pagan has to remind them about their God. That's how warped their thinking has become, because they've never dealt with the guilt of what they did to Joseph. In fact, you're going to see it at the very end. After their daddy dies, they still can't get past it. So, as you look at this story, what happens is next, they stand before the steward, they go in to have this thing, and Joseph, and I don't want you to miss this, you got to realize this whole family is dysfunctional. There's 4 different moms, there's 1 dad, there's Joseph and Benjamin, and were from the same mother, and she died giving birth to Benjamin. So Benjamin is like the last tangible biological link Joseph has. And this kid comes in who he hasn't seen for 20 years. And Joseph walks up and goes, "And is this the brother that you were telling me about?" And the more he looks at him, the more 20 years of absence, 20 years of wondering, 20 years of everything is sitting before him or standing before him, and he just can't handle it. And basically he goes, "Hey, I got to text guys I got to go take care of," and he walks away. And he finds a quiet place in his chamber, apart from any Egyptian, apart from any Hebrew, apart from anybody, and he weeps down and he bawls like a baby. And it's just too much. Because this isn't the right time, this isn't the right place, this isn't the right situation yet to reveal who he is. And he looks at just the overwhelming awesomeness of this idea. Here's my little brother. Finally. And as he looks at them, he goes away and he cries. He bawls like a baby. He finally cleans himself up, and he comes back in, and he says, "Okay, guys, let's eat." Now, we don't get this in our culture. But the idea of Egyptians and Hebrews eating in the same room is way off the charts. I would say probably the closest analogy we could have is if our president decided to invite a whole bunch of Russian oligarchs to a meal at the White House. And we would go, "What in the world are you doing?" That's what happened. When Joseph says, "You bring those guys to lunch in my house," that was unheard of. Even so, that even in his house, they could not eat together at the same table. Now, they didn't have tables like we have tables. What it probably was mats that were spread out on the ground. So there was a mat over here for the Egyptian people, there was a mat over here for the Hebrew people, and then there was Joseph's own little eating place. And so Joseph then gives them instructions. And he says, "Okay, I want them to be seated in this order." And he puts all 11 of them in their birth order. I don't know for sure. This will bother Lael the rest of the service, so I'm probably just doing it just for this reason. But mathematically, somebody figured it out that there are over 39 million combinations to get that order right. And when all of a sudden these brothers look at each other and they go, "Well, this is unusual." Again, this is a culture in which there's this God sense of things, that the gods are in charge, and so they don't know if Joseph's like this Egyptian leader who has this insight to some of the gods who could give him that information. They don't know why, but all of a sudden they look at each other and they're in birth order. And then when they start serving food, okay, here's a ribeye for you, and here's a ribeye for you, here's a ribeye for you, here's a ribeye for you. And then he comes to Benjamin. Now, I think, first of all, I think it was a test, part of a test. But I also think it's just kind of the emotion of it. I think it's one of those things like, "Oh, Benjamin, here's a ribeye, and hey, oh, by the way, here's another ribeye. Jim, here's another ribeye." And by the time you know, he's got 5 ribeyes sitting there. I think it's just the overwhelmingness of the idea. This is my little brother. I haven't seen so. Here, have another. Here, have another corn on the cob. Here's another glass. Here's another. Hey, go, Benjamin. Let him try the shrimp too. Get him some shrimp there. And it's just this overwhelmingness of his little brother being there. And that's where we're going to end the story this morning. Because I think there's a ton of lessons in the story, even to this point for us, from all of the characters, okay, that it talks about. So let's start with the idea of Jacob or Israel, because I think that's probably one of the first lessons. Here it is. Jacob has a really hard time letting his kids go, particularly Benjamin, the youngest. Let me say that as you grow and as you mature and as you get older, you start to realize how hard this is to let your kids go. We have a lot of young parents in this group. One of the hardest lessons you're going to learn in the next couple of years is to let your kids go. They can't stay little forever. I know you want them to do that. And I know some of you who your kids are in diapers right now, you're like, oh, no, I want them to grow up. And I know that for some of you young parents, my heart, first of all, just let me say a couple of things. The fact that you have your children here this morning is encouraging to those of us that are here. Because I understand, I don't understand, but I do know how hard it is to get kids together to do something like this. I understand the dilemma for many of you young parents of diapers and I can't get a break and I don't even feel like I can get anything done because these kids are just always there and will they ever, and the overwhelmingness of all of it. You feel like you've lost your identity. You feel like it will never end. Here, let me say this as nice as I can say it. You're going to blink and it's going to be over. It goes so fast. Enjoy as much of it as you can while you can, okay? But understand this. They're on loan. They're not yours. As a Christian, everything you have is on loan. Every breath that you take is a gift from an almighty, gracious, holy, loving God. Every heartbeat that you have today is a gift from God. You are owed none of it. Your children are a gift. The car that you're going to get into is a gift. The gas that you put into it is a gift. The home that you're going to go to is a gift. All of it is something God has simply said, here, I'm going to give you and entrust you with it, but you need to understand it's mine. You just need to take care of it, including our children. And we have people in here who have had to give their children back to God long before most people do. And that is one of the most gut-wrenching things as a pastor you will ever go through. And for the parents here who have walked through that, you need to know you have my utmost adoration. But all of us need to understand our children are not ours. We have to learn to let them go. Your job as a parent is to prepare them to be able to go out, love the Lord, love other people, support themselves, contribute to society, make a difference. It's not to hang on to them as long as you can have them. It's to let them go. And that is one of the hardest things. You see that, you see this struggle in the life of Jacob. You see this struggle, and he just can't let Benjamin go. On the first trip, everybody goes but Benjamin. He keeps Benjamin close by. Boy, Benjamin's the last one. And for those of you that you're at the last kid, you know, I mean, some of you are like, oh, the last kid. No, I know, you still want to hang on. Remember this. They belong to God, not to us. I think we learn that from Jacob. I think from the life of Joseph, we see so much here. One of the things that you see for Joseph is how burdened he is for his family. I mean, every time he asks, how's Dad? He didn't say Dad, he said, how's your father? I can't imagine how hard it was for him to look at his little brother and say, tell me about this guy. Who is he? But he does. And he loves him, and he's so passionate about his family. And by the way, they know when they bring Simeon out to him, and Simeon's all well cared for, and Simeon's been all taken care of, they understand that, you know what? This guy has been very good to them. Joseph shows them incredible love. Joseph is the one who calls them to his house. You need to understand, in this culture, that didn't happen. In this culture, for Joseph to step out of the box and say, see those guys right there? I want you to bring them to my house for lunch. I'm going to tell you right now, every Egyptian in his house didn't know what to think. You know they're Hebrew, right? You know we don't eat with Hebrew. You know Hebrews and Egyptians don't. I know you have a background as a Hebrew, but you're Egyptian now. You've been Egyptian for 20 years. Come on, you can't do this, Joseph. No, Joseph's second in charge. He can do pretty much whatever he wants as long as Pharaoh lets him. So he says, bring those Hebrew people into we're going to have dinner with them. Whoa. And again, these farm agriculture, shepherd kind of people walk in to an Egyptian home, which was massive and ornate and incredibly beautiful and incredibly overwhelming, and they are scared to death thinking that they're going to die. And what does Joseph do? Does he keep agitating them? No. He puts them at ease. By the end of the story, they're having a great time. Why? Because here's the thing. Now remember, don't forget this. Other than Benjamin, every one of these people was involved in Joseph's imprisonment. Every one of these people sold him out for money. Every one of these people looked at him and said, you're worth more to us with the money we can get from you than having you as my brother. And Joseph is now in a position of power to crush them, to enslave them. Let me throw you in prison, and I want you to experience just a small glimpse of what I went through. Let me make your life as miserable as I can make it. I'm going to crush you like you crushed me. I'm going to show you that you have no value, just like you didn't value me. No, Joseph didn't do anything. Just says, come to my house. Sit down and eat. I want to give you what I get to experience every day. The best, I'm telling you, guys, this was the best meal in all. There's only one person who was eating better than the brothers and Joseph right now, and that was Pharaoh. And Joseph is sharing everything that he has with his brothers. Grace, forgiveness, all of that. Joseph is now portraying that to his brothers. He didn't have to do any of that, but here's the thing, and this is the lesson I think for it. Joseph decides that in spite of how he had been treated, he was going to be the hero, and he was going to step up to the plate in the relationship, and he was going to be the one that reconciled everybody. Here's my question. Who's going to be the hero in your broken relationship? Well, you don't understand. That person hurt me, and until they get it right, who's going to be the hero? You don't understand. My wife, all she does is she doesn't do anything for me, and and he doesn't do anything for me, and blah. Who's going to be the hero in a relationship? Who's going to step up and say, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of what people do, how you treat me, what you say? I'm going to serve you regardless. Joseph loves and shows his brothers kindness and grace and mercy and goodness and pours out blessing upon him. Why? He decides to be the hero in the relationship. Who's going to be the hero in the relationship? Kids, listen, some of you are so ticked at somebody at school. Who's going to be the hero? Who's going to step up to the plate and say, you know what, let's just put this behind us? Who's it going to be? You see that in the life of Joseph. You see Joseph stepping up to the plate with all of that. Here's what you learn from the brothers. No matter what happens, because they have not dealt with their sin, because they have not dealt with what they did to Joseph, they do not see anything that happens to them in a good light. So much so that there is, and we assume that it's pagan. Joseph may have had a Hebrew taking care of the gate of his house. But here's how crazy this story is. The brothers come up, and instead of looking at it as a gift, they look at it as God's gift. In fact, when they find the silver, that's what they say, God's angry with us. They come to the steward of the house and they go, you need to understand, we didn't do anything wrong, we didn't do anything wrong. And the steward looks at him and goes, stop. Your God blessed you. I got your money, I gave it back. Your God did this for you. Now again, in a culture of pagan gods, this is an incredible statement. Where they have to look at the Hebrews and go, okay, look, your God did this for you. And remind them that God is on their side. That's how crazy this is. But that's what it took in this story, for them to understand that. And listen, here's what happens. When you and I allow sin, when we allow guilt into our lives, what happens is it starts to taint everything. It starts to taint the way you see everything. So even good things happen, you see them as bad. Why? Because the boys never deal with the guilt. And you're going to see this, by the way, all the way until the end of their lives. They go to their grave seeing good things as bad things. Because they never deal with this. Listen to me. The importance of you and I having clear consciences before God and dealing with our stuff. When we can do that, we can start to see life as God intended us to see life. If we don't do that, life will be tainted. And that's what you see in this story. You see them even looking at good things that happen as bad. The last lesson is this. Many Bible commentators, many Bible scholars see Joseph as a type of Christ. And by that, here's what I mean. When we look at the life of Jesus Christ, we see all these incredible things. When we look at the life of Joseph, we see a lot of parallels. There are a lot of things that are in Joseph's life that are very much like the life of Jesus. So often, what Bible commentators refer to Joseph as is a type of Christ. He's kind of an Old Testament version of what Jesus was going to be like. And this is what you see in this story. You see somebody who comes to somebody who doesn't deserve forgiveness. They don't deserve grace. They don't deserve love. They don't deserve mercy. And Joseph pays the price and says, look, you need to understand, I have this now, and I want to be friends with you, and I want to share what I have with you, and I don't want there to be anything between us. Much like what Jesus does for us on the cross, as I illustrated it last week. There's nothing in us that is deserving of salvation. There's nothing in us that should make God want us. But God is the hero who steps up to the plate and says, I will forgive you. I will love you. I will show you grace. I will show you mercy. I will give you my righteousness. I will do all of these things if you will just simply accept me. And in many ways, that's the same story here. All the brothers had to do was respond to Joseph's offer. And Joseph is the one who pays the price. Joseph is the one who does everything. Joseph is the one who reaches out. My challenge to you is this. You and I need to do the same, especially if you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, why are you harboring bitterness or judgment or whatever else against somebody else because they hurt you? Because listen to me, there is no one who has hurt you more than you hurt Christ with your sin. No one. In fact, you think about it for a minute. The Lord's Prayer? You understand what you're praying? If you pray the Lord's Prayer, do you understand what you're saying? Father, forgive me. How? As I forgive other people. Do you understand the magnitude of that prayer? God, here's what I want you to do. You forgive me in the same way that I'm forgiving to other people. That's Joseph. I'm not going to hold what you did against you. I am going to step forward and I'm going to forgive you and love you and show grace and show mercy to you, and I will reach out to you. It's what God does for us at the cross. It's what we're to do for everyone we come in contact with. So my question to you is this. Who do you need to be the hero for? What relationship do you need to step up to the plate in? Or are you going to be like the brothers and never deal with your stuff and take it to your grave? It's your call. It's your life. God says there's a better way to live it. So I come to the end of it this morning with this idea as we leave. Joseph reminds us that forgiveness and grace are necessary to restore broken relationships. Someone has to be the hero and start the process. Guilt plagued the brothers for their entire life. But Joseph refuses to hold a grudge. He does the right thing at the right time in the right way. I pray that each one of us follow that pattern for our lives this week. Let's pray. Lord, help us. Easy to talk about, hard to do. Lord, some of us have got stuff that we keep carrying that we just need to get rid of, so help us to do that this week. For others, Lord, there are people that have hurt us, that have wronged us, and we just won't let it go. Help us to do that this week. Lord, may we have the same attitude that Joseph had, where we reach out, where we love, where we show kindness, mercy, grace, and all that we do. And Lord, may people see Jesus in us. These things we ask.